FemTech Real Money Talks.
Welcome to FemTech Real Money Talks, the go-to podcast where the pulse of FemTech beats loudest. I'm your host, Yelena Lipilina, and founder of Visible Sports. And each episode, we dive deep into the world of fundraising for FemTech startups. And I couldn't be happier that our today's guest is Trish Costello, the founder and CEO of Portfolia, one of the most active U.S. investors in women's health and FemTech. Under her leadership, Portfolia has made 46 investments, including Maven Clinic, Every Health, and Gameto, all the while activating thousands of women as venture investors. Trish is a pioneer in building collaborative women-centered funds that target high-growth sectors like femtech, longevity, consumer products, AI, of course AI, and sustainability. Trish, very much welcome in our studio today. Hi, how are you feeling?
Hello, it's wonderful to be here with you today. Talking to women's
Amazing.
health and femtech. I love
That's fantastic. What I normally do before we just, dive into like the business aspects of everything. I love to hear personal stories. And I think yours is super remarkable because, I've read that before founding Portfolio, before everything, you were the executive director of the battered women's shelter. And this is the issue that is very close to my heart. But that's the connection like not many people might understand. How did that leap happen, from, this very particular, very powerful topic and very traumatic, not to say the least, to, investing in women's health and startups in women's health. So what's the
that.
story?
Well, Lena, you've done your homework because that's
Of course.
going back some 40 years. But I'll jump in by saying women's empowerment and unlocking opportunities for women for, yes, from safety to being able to be entrepreneurs, to being able to choose the lives they want, all the way today to being able to create our wealth, to invest our money, and to back the kinds of companies and technologies we want in the world. All of these things enhance our lives. So there has been a throughput from my days all the way today, some 40 years later, where this has been an important part of my life. And I see it as an extension, with what we're doing today. The investments that I make today, Elena, in women's health are going to be legacies for my 4-year-old granddaughter. It will change her life. It's already changed my daughter's lives and my mother's lives. And we're changing, our whole community by investing our money in those companies that are important to us.
That is super inspiring. My startup is about empowering women through sports and physical activity. And like my not journey, but like my line of thinking actually started with gender violence and the ways to stop that. Do something like specific in the legal framework. And for me, it was so kind of heartwarming to see, the leap that you've made and the connection that you made just now. So you worked in this very important position, but then you joined a startup, right? And then you made a very successful exit. So you were in the startup founder's shoes and you made that
Yeah.
exit, right? But can you walk me through like, how did this whole thinking happen? Because like, did you have like this aha moment?
My startup was in pediatric health, so it
Huh,
was in the healthcare space, but it was focused on children and pediatricians and in that specific market. But I'll just even take this back a little bit. Those that work in the nonprofit world, and when I was when I ran the battered women's shelter, that was in the 80s that was so brand new. The term battered women had just come out in a book. And so many of these things that I've been a part of have been, startups. And so a startup in the nonprofit world is very similar to a startup in the for-profit world. You're needing to find words to describe it. You are hunting money to put your vision, into the world and to create new opportunities or safety, in this space. And so there's so much in common. In fact, I would say a startup in both of those worlds are more similar than a startup to a corporate. a big corporate player. The challenges and the opportunities are so similar. So that's exactly right. I was actually at AT&T before that, then went into the nonprofit world. I believe I was always looking for the experience to grow and expand and to be able to meet what I saw as my mission in the world. I went on to pediatrics. That was another space that was so important for us to really have an opportunity to learn more about and put more products into the pediatric world. When we sold that, did have a nice exit. I also had twin infant baby girls. I
Oh,
so I've experienced a lot in the world. Those and as I said, now a grandmother. And so I began angel investing. At the time, Elena, the term angel wasn't even out there. I just was in a community of other, people wanting to start companies. And those of us who had exits and had money started investing in those companies and advising them and being on their boards. And then people would give me their money and say, well, you're in the middle of this. Can you invest a little bit of my money? And so became a venture capitalist almost without, you know, knowing what that was. Venture capital was still a cottage industry in the 90s. And what was between that and Portfolia was I joined the Kauffman Foundation and I created for them the first training program for venture capitalists in the world called the Kauffman Fellows. And that is still, it's the largest global training program for venture capital partners. There's over 800 venture capitalists that have gone through that. Over 250 venture capital firms were created with the Kauffman Fellows, and they've invested over $3 trillion globally. And so that was that next point from which I decided to create Portfolia.
wow. Okay. And that sounds like it sounds like a journey with a point where you finally kind of arrived, not at the final destination, but how would you say, like, versus how Portfolio started to where it is right now? How would you describe Portfolio's strategic focus? And has it evolved or has it changed over the time?
Yes, yes. Um, so I created Portfolia because I wanted to put women at the center of venture capital investing. I did not see that that was going to happen in the traditional way. And so, uh, by creating Kauffman Fellows, I had put women into venture capital firms, but they would be one woman in a firm of 8 or 10 or 20 people. And we know, Elena, that today we know you can't put one woman in an environment of all men and think you're going to really significantly change the culture or direction of that organization. And so I looked at this and I thought, what I had worked with hundreds of venture capital funds and very, very few people can say that. And I thought, I know so deeply what makes venture firms work. What if I took a greenfield opportunity and I said, I am going to recreate venture capital based on how women like to operate? How would we do it if we were building it greenfield with no constraints? How would we create venture capital? How would the experience be? How would we invest that money? Who would we invest in? How would we make decisions? How would we organize? How would we think if it were only up to us? And that, in fact, was the origin of Portfolia. Everything about it is quite different. It was designed from day one to activate the wealth of individual women, not as a temporary solution, going out to individuals and then later go to pension funds, but with the idea that the goal was to get as many women, limited partners as possible investing in the funds. And then we would make the decisions together on what companies we wanted to invest in and then bring our huge marketing force and our consumer force and our consumer dollars behind those companies to make them successful. And then finally, when they succeed, we all succeed together and we create even more wealth.
That sounds incredible. But what is the secret sauce? And what is, like, how is Portfolio different from any other? Like, apart from the gender angle, like how's it different? And what is, what is this thing that you apply from like, okay, that's the ingredient for success and I'm going to have it here at Portfolio?
So I split those into two things. So the first is, what are the core foundational items that are critical to have a successful returns on funds? Because when you get right down to it, a lot of people don't realize this, but your customer, when you're a venture capitalist, is that limited partner investor investing in you. Oftentimes we think our customer is the entrepreneur. It really isn't. That's our product. We're showing that we can pick the right entrepreneurs, but who I'm beholding to is that investor investing in me. So how do I, from day one, you're thinking, how am I going to deliver returns back? How am I going to meet the needs of that investor in my fund? And that's in returns first, and then for impact for me. So both of those are important, but I have to have returns first to continue to have women come in. So, there's some fundamentals. You have to be an expert in the area in which you're going to invest. You need to have great deal flow. You need to do deep due diligence to make sure you're making the right decisions. And you need to understand that that's just step one. You need to add value to that company, especially from 30,000 feet all the way to an exit, and then ensure that your investors are going to get, a great return and that money's going to come back, and that the timing is right. So those fundamentals are all critical. I believe venture capital today is a specialist business. Early on, it was generalist, but you really need to know, for instance, in women's health, it's not just what investments are right today. You need to have been watching those scientists for 3 years or longer. You need to have been looking at areas that you think are investable, sometimes for a decade. I was looking for an opportunity for endometriosis for 10 years. I was looking for an opportunity for preeclampsia, which is a great killer of women in childbirth, for 10 years. And it's just this year that we've made an investment in a preeclampsia company and endometriosis. Elena, endometriosis takes 8 years on average to be diagnosed, and it's terribly painful for women, and it causes infertility. So we've been watching those companies in the labs, and now is the time to invest. So those things, when you really understand about providing returns, you are a student, of this business. And so that's the basics. You have to have the basics. Everything else in venture capital on Sand Hill Road is culture. And it was built for men by men. And so I could strip out all that culture. I knew what the basics are, strip out all that culture and create a new culture around how do we want to invest? We want to invest collaboratively. Oftentimes, there's some really interesting research that's happened between how men and women invest and how they think about their money. Men think of it as a competitive pursuit. We think about it as collaborative. These are generalities, but you see this, if we love to read, we often form book clubs. Men investing with
Yep.
solo. We see it as a community affair. There's been some interesting studies in Berkeley where they've shown men a hockey stick and said, "You're the best investor of your group." And they have them spit on a cotton ball, and they're able to show that their testosterone spikes. You tell a woman that and she's going to go, "Oh my God, my friends are not doing well. What am I doing differently? How can I help them?" Whatever it is, I want it to help them. And so it's all those fundamental differences, Elena, are all reflected in everything we do. 250 investors in every fund. They can all come every month and watch the company's pitch to the partners, the professional VCs. They can ask questions. I can tell you, you could put $20 million in a venture fund. You will never be at the table. You will never see what's going on behind. We work out in the open and we're training people as we're doing it. We'll say, we terminology that's accessible to all because we're trying to bring them along. So I could go on for hours about
No. Thank you. assuming I would have $20 million. It's a warming thought, you know? I mean, I would like when I have my 20 mil, I would definitely, I would definitely like based on what you're describing, like I'd be knocking on your doors, here's my money, show me, you know?
Oh, no, but let me back you up here. I'd say if you could put 20 million in a different fund, you can put $10,000 in a portfolio fund. That's our minimum. And we have
Okay, good.
250 people, and that 10,000, now that's not the average. I mean, the average is closer to 50, but we do take $10,000 investors, and that's spread across 12 to 16 companies in a fund. And you can be involved as you like. So that's how it works.
Okay, that's good. That's the definition. That's the definition of femtech. Our podcast is called Femtech Real Money Talks. But we just recorded a podcast with Laura Minkini, the founder of Athena DAO, and she had some very challenging like definition of femtech. In fact, she refused to call femtech in terms of she was basically saying that femtech is not consumer apps. Femtech is real hardcore research. And would you share the same view, or like what is your definition of femtech, and should we be calling this femtech in terms of this particular conversation?
So our first three funds in women's health were called FemTech. We were the first venture capital fund in women's health, and that was in 2018. Since then, I've had FemTech 1, 2, and 3, and Active Aging 1 and 2. Now, our latest fund we're calling Women's Health Fund 4. For that very reason, in that some people think it's too cutesy. They think it is just the apps, that it doesn't reflect the deep science that we're also investing in. I personally don't have a problem with femtech or women's health. I think we want to be as inclusive as possible. We want to do everything that has to do with women's health. All comers are welcome, in women's health. And whether we call it femtech or we're just directly to women's health. I changed the name because I thought it would be clearer to people, especially now when there's a lot of questions of are we making it too pink? And it really is, a little bit of both. I mean, we're dealing with everyday issues like bladder control, as well as some of the highest science you could possibly imagine today. So we're inclusive of all, but I do respect what she's saying about, wanting to make sure that people understand that this can be really serious science, and these are serious investments. And that's why so many people now, every venture capital fund in America today that's in healthcare wants to have at least one women's health investment. It is the hottest space in healthcare today. Maybe AI and how AI is impacting healthcare. But after that, there's really nothing that is more popular today than women's health.
That's really heartwarming to hear, and we'll get on that. I have a particular question on that. You mentioned the Women's Health Fund 4 that is currently ready to invest in women's health products, right? Can you share how much capital that is? And the second question is, any notable investments recently that you would love to share?
Yes. So we've just launched Women's Health Fund 4. It is open to new investors. It is open for at a minimum of $10,000. We will take likely 350 investors in this fund. So we've just launched it, but we have made our first two investments and they're quite exciting. One is Gamito, you mentioned earlier.
Yep.
That, I'm telling you, I think that is one of the most exciting funds or companies in women's health today. It is making IVF way cheaper, way faster, and perhaps most importantly, way easier on our bodies. In effect, they call it an ovary development platform outside of the body. And so instead of weeks of just pumping ourselves full of hormone injections, most of it is able to be done outside of the body. And then the developing fetus is put back into the body for further growth. So it is just a huge advancement in IVF. It is approved in countries in Latin America. There have already been 9 babies born and it is now in the US going through FDA approval. So quite exciting. Then also, so that's the main piece of it for Tilio that we're looking at now. That's the division of the company. The other part of it is that it may enable us, Elena, to determine when or if we want to go into menopause. So
Hmm.
it has a
Okay.
huge longevity piece to it as well. And many people think the key to longevity is being able to figure out the ovary and how the ovary responds, because that's the first cell that actually ages before others. And so if they figure out the longevity key to ovaries, then, we are really looking at huge advancements for our health and longevity. Is an amazing entrepreneur. This round that we've just participated in, and if people invest in Women's Health Fund 4, they'll have a piece to this. But she's already raised about $120 million because this is a deep science company. And we just can't wait to see what the future is and to be a part of her future. The second,
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in about Gamito. As you might understand now, I love stories. So do you remember the first time you met the founding team and like the first time they pitched to you and how long it took from like, the first pitch, if there ever was one, to making that decision, okay, we're investing in Gamito. What was the story behind it?
well, with Gamito, we had been watching them for quite some time before they were ready to enter the US market. And one of my partners had been basically tracking them for about 3 years. And it was just at this point where we're doing their Series C round to enter the US market that we said now's the time for us to get in. There's a huge amount of upside in this company, but because they'd already been approved outside of the US, a lot of the risk was out. Understand in a lot of these really high science companies, it can be very binary. It's either it's going to work or it's not. And so you're either going to have a huge return or you're going to lose all your money. And so we've waited long enough, tracked it long enough, got to know her well enough to know exactly when we wanted to jump in and put our money to work.
Okay.
I'll be meeting with her. She's going to be speaking at an event with us in the next week, and we're going to be going way deeper in her founder's story. And by the way, she's about a month from having her own baby, and so we're looking forward to that discussion. So
Wow. Okay.
very
No,
exciting.
that sounds like an incredible, journey and ride. And that also, I think it's very, very important because our audience, at its core is the founders and or aspiring founders, as well as the other ecosystem players. And I think sometimes there are these, quite unrealistic expectations that, once the, pitch lands on somebody's lap, they're like, yeah, hey, we're going to invest. But in fact, these things take years sometimes, to mature and grow. And, investments are not some sort of an instantaneous thing. Unfortunately for the startups, sometimes, at an early stage, especially. But so the way you talked about Gamito, it makes it kind of evident that, they're are mature and that's when that decision was made. Do you invest in the startups at some earlier stages like series A or seed or pre-seed, or is it not your strategy?
We also do seed. So let me tell you about the second company we're in. So this is the Series C, ABC. So it's a little later, although, there's a lot of development left to do, to get in the US market. But the second company that we invested in is one where we were some of the first money in. It was a Series Seed, actually their first round. They went in as a Series Seed. And this company is called Your Choice. It was still in the lab in Berkeley, and Your Choice will be the first male birth control pill. Yes. And so people will say, is this women's health? I'm telling you, Elena,
It
with the
is.
first
It
male
is.
birth control pill, that's women's
You
health.
don't.
That's going
You
to
don't need to
change.
tell me. It is. It is. I mean, it's been a long time coming. I mean, Trish.
Yes. Well, I'll tell you. So what happened? We met the team, uh, Akash and Nadia. met the team. Again, scientists in the lab. They were not even in human trials. They were still working with dogs. They had moved from mice to dogs. They wanted to go into primates and studied in primates. And we were so taken with the team and so excited about what they were doing that we just jumped, and we had just met them, jumped in really deep and did hardcore due diligence in like 3 weeks, came back and, looked at this and said, this is a binary one. This is either going to be one of the best deals, investments we ever make, or we're going to lose our money. And we were prepared to take that risk, of a total loss. And today they're now through primates, in their third phase of human trials. And this definitely is not going to be a loss. This is going to be a great gain, and everything is working. Not only is it very, very effective, but it also can be reversed in just a matter of, a few short months, which was the last piece of that we're doing, the last bit of the research. And it's just been an amazing investment. We invested in it in FemTech 2. We couldn't get in FemTech 3 because they didn't need any more money. And then FemTech 4, that was one of the first investments we made. So people will also have a piece of that company. So those are a couple of them. We often will get in early. We were the first money in OsteoBoost, and OsteoBoost is the first approved solution for osteopenia. So, osteoporosis, there's been literally no movement on osteoporosis, and it's a killer for us as we age. Osteopenia is what you get before osteoporosis, and you can get it in your 30s. And so it was just a huge priority for us. And so first money in, now it's gone all the way through FDA clearance. It's been 7 years. The product is out, and we're just so excited. And so, some of these take a while to develop because you have to show they're safe. You have to show they're effective. They have to go through all the regulatory, but it's so
For sure.
exciting on the other side.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of, long-term vision and a lot of patience to harvest all this, I'm genuinely interested in how, like you were saying, like, oh, we met the team and like we did the due diligence, dug really deep. But what is that you look for? Like, what are the signs? What are the, like these little tiny signals that you pick up and you're saying, okay, this is either gonna be our biggest success or biggest failure, but we're prepared to take that risk.
Yeah, so you're looking for a huge market on those. Now there's some where you're looking more for an incremental, but on these two, you're looking for a huge market that is untapped, that is, a solution that can really shift medicine and women's health. You are looking for the team that has the capacity to be able to address a moment in a market like this. And in the case of your choice, they'd already done this once before in a different area, the two of them together. So that gave us great confidence, as well in them. You're looking for just a clear eyed vision of, an understanding of how long this is going to take and that they have the resilience and maturity, to pull this off. And then, you're looking for someone that is, open minded, and as good as they are, they're still coachable. Because one of the things that happens, no matter how many years or even decades you may have as an entrepreneur, you get down in the weeds, and you need advisors and investors who are up at 30,000 feet and sometimes can see things that you don't see. And so you want an entrepreneur that really does take advice and brings in others around him or her, and also has the resilience, because there will be ups and downs. I've never seen the fairy tale story. This is the hero's journey, Elena. This is the true hero's journey. And they are going to take arrows. There's going to be
Yep.
days they just feel like they're dragging themselves up the mountain. And that, to me, that's always what I'm looking for in the final analysis. Can they go the distance?
And what are what is the sign that you like something very, very subtle where you're like, okay, this person can go the distance? Like maybe on a concrete example, like just one person where, they were saying something and there was like, okay, this person has resilience. Therefore, like, or this team has resilience based on their, individual stories. What was that, that you can possibly name?
Well, sometimes it's as simple as, looking at their history and looking what they've been through. And sometimes it's as simple as the question of, you know, tell me, tell me your worst failure. Tell me when you really screwed up and how did you make it through it? And there are some people, and you see this, our entrepreneurs tend to be a little older. You see that in healthcare anyway. But we also like to see that we want to see they've had some life experience. We are, the typical idea that an entrepreneur is some kid out of college. Those are not our entrepreneurs. We want somebody that, has had some ups and downs and some great success. And so when an entrepreneur says, well, I've never had a failure, that's usually a big red flag for us. 'Cause we don't want to be the person where the first time they realize that they're not immortal.
Whoops. That's painful. Ouch.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah.
We
No,
wanna
I
know
hear
we
you.
wanna do that. Yes, and so that's part of the diligence too. You're looking at that. You're talking to people they've worked with in the past. And there's just, um, that's also part of being able to have these relationships. And we have relationships all over the country and all over the world, with people that are working with these teams, as well. Now, 75% of our CEOs are women when we invest, but 25% are men.
Mhm.
Near 90% of our money comes from women, and we designed what we do for women, but we always try to be inclusive. So, men are investors as well. When you're looking at your CEOs change. And I just always want the best leader in that company. If a man, in fact, in my preeclampsia company, Murphy, if a man is going to solve preeclampsia, which is the biggest killer of women during childbirth, and he's the expert, I'm behind him 100%. So that's another thing that, we're always looking for the best teams.
What is like, since we were talking about founders, let's switch the gears and go into the typical portfolio investor.
So in the US, to be an investor in a venture capital fund, you have to be accredited. So, or be licensed for financial services. And accredited means you have 200,000 in income or a million in assets minus your home. So, and that's because the regulatory people want to protect investors. So that's the bottom line. You have to have 200,000 in income. But the typical investor is just everything that you can imagine. Entrepreneurs that have cashed out, that want to stay in the game or even that haven't cashed out yet. People that are professionals, lawyers, accountants, doctors. In our women's health fund, about 40% are in the medical profession of some sort. So I have just a built-in diligence, team there always. Housewives, moms that are at home, that are with their kids but want to keep that kind of intellectual curiosity going. They're just anybody and everybody that loves the idea of being a part of women's health or sustainability or any of the funds that we do.
Incredible. And throughout the years, have you seen any changes in, the investor behavior, especially when it comes to women's health or femtech? Like has there, been like the surge of interest or vice versa? Like, have you seen something really like some tectonic shifts in that particular space and with portfolio, of course?
It's huge, huge changes because as I mentioned earlier, in 2018, when we founded FemTech One for Portfolia, there had never been a women's health venture capital fund. Only 20% of healthcare VCs had even done a venture capital deal. And I was told women's health is not a venture capital area. There's never been $1 billion company. Women's health, women's health is a product or a niche. It's not a company that you could sell. So in just 7 short years, women's health has become the darling of women's health or healthcare investing. I alone have two multi-billion-dollar companies in my portfolio that we have, assisted in growing to that point, and at least a half dozen just under the $1 billion mark, of our 46 companies. And we've made over 100 investments in those companies. Initially, when we started, we were just focused on diseases and conditions that had to do with our female organs, and there was nobody else doing that investing. We were doing it. Another part of that investing is we had to bring others along with us, other VCs to come in behind us. We had to educate them. We were evangelist about women's health because nobody else was doing it. And so that was all. It was just a brand new market and just required so much, as I said, evangelism to get it moving. By the second fund, and certainly in the third, we had begun to expand. We still did those ones that were just about our, ovaries, breasts, reproduction, but we started looking at different diseases that affected us differently or disproportionately. Heart disease, a huge killer of women, and very, very different from how heart disease presents with men. Pain management, addiction, inflammatory diseases, dementia, all of these things, rapidly, graphically, dramatically different for women than men, and the type of treatment and the type of research we need. We also did 2 active aging and longevity funds, specifically. Menopause at the time was kind of a joke. In our first fund, one of my VC, associates that I know in another fund said, "Trish, what are you going to do in menopause? Fund those little fans that women want to cool off?" It was, it was a bit of a joke. And today, menopause itself, $200 billion market just in itself. So I'm so delighted that, and now, as I said, every healthcare fund has at least one partner that's looking at women's health deals. So we're really in this fabulous space. And so now, it used to be in that first fund, I could only do seed deals or maybe a Series A because there weren't enough companies out there that had received earlier funding. Today, a Maven Clinic or Everly Health, as I said, those are both multi-billion-dollar companies, all kinds of companies, Midway. My last couple of them, Mercy Bio, a Series B company, Hervey, a Series C, Gamito, a Series C. There's really later stage companies, as well as still a lot of new. We're always going to be doing seed and pre-seed, but there's companies that are mature and are getting ready to go into the marketplace.
You are actually one of the few people that describes the women's health market as such, as the one like that is exciting and blooming, is humongous, because the people who we've talked to, including like very big players in the space, they're obviously not, there's not enough innovation because, innovation also needs to be like a lot of innovation needs to be funded to, pre-seed or seed by grants, for example. And particularly in the US, it's not the right now, and I'm sorry to say that it's not the most conducive environment to have things like that, right? To ask for support in terms of government grants for any type of research that goes into the back, like lays the foundation for startups we are talking about. So it's actually quite uplifting to see that you are saying that, hey, this is huge, like this is the second thing after the AI, like, and you
Yeah.
honestly, you're the first person to put it that way. So so I'll rephrase my question then, and I'll ask, what kind of breakthroughs and achievements, or like what's going to happen with women's health, like 5 years? I'm going to take 5 years down the road. Okay. So what are
Yeah.
the big breakthroughs do you think that need to happen, or, like any shifts in policy, you know, that need to happen to make this number one, like AI being number two, women's health being number one.
That's the future that I'm living in.
Okay.
And it is an enormous market. So number one, women's health is not a political issue.
Uh-huh.
And we have to say that over and over and over and over. Research in women's health is what's good for the country and good for the world. What I'm seeing that makes me positive very positive is that, and I predicted this from the beginning, and it's just taken a little longer, but a lot of the big foundations are stepping in. You saw the big
Mm.
announcement by the Gates Foundation, by Melinda French, the Milken Foundation. A lot of them are stepping up now with billions of dollars so that there's not a drop in the research. The other thing is, although we were woefully underfunded for research up until now, AI is leapfrogging that by taking all the disparate data points and putting them together to change the practice of so much of women's health. We're seeing it in childbirth, we're seeing it in aging, especially, but in all of these disease components where the research wasn't being done in the old way, and now we're getting huge movement forward by putting really good AI models on top of it. That's what you're seeing with the preeclampsia, and that's what you're seeing with a lot of these blood based tests for ovarian cancer that we still didn't have. There wasn't a test for ovarian cancer or endometriosis. We're just seeing it over and over and over. And finally, what I'm very excited about is those funds with the big money, big dollars, big paychecks are coming in behind. For instance, one of my favorites is General Catalyst, and really want to do a shout out. Holly Maloney at General Catalyst, has led huge rounds in companies that we had backed earlier. You have a Maven Clinic. She came in, I believe, in General Catalyst on their first investment over $70 million check, and they're so good at taking companies public. And we do need to have that. We need to be able to make those investments and see those big paydays. And that's what will bring everybody in. So it's really on all sides. So many women, early researchers that are in the academic settings are focusing their medical research on women's health. What do I see in 5 years? We're in so many companies that are going to be really out in the marketplace in 5 years. When we have that first male birth control pill is going to be out in 5 years. There's still not good protocols that are used for childbirth. And we have a lot of childbirth injuries and others out there. I believe we're going to see a real shift in that. I believe we're going to see a shift in how women, as we age, less heart disease, less osteoporosis, less dementia. But I think one of the things that is very important to me is that these changes are going to come for women that look like me. We have to ensure that Black and brown women are going to have the same access to care, and their needs are different. Just like women and men are different in the lab, African American women are different. What they're experiencing in childbirth, preeclampsia, stroke, it's a scourge. And we're really focused on that as well. I have a fund, Rising America, that has a huge focus just on women of color and healthcare. And we've got to make sure that we don't leave Black and brown women behind.
That's beautifully said. My pre-last question was if you could sum it up in one powerful sentence, what would you say? If this all you said was a slogan, your caption of what the future of women's health is, what would that be?
When women come together with our money and our power and passion, backing the companies we want in the world in women's health, we change the world, we create new solutions, and we create a legacy to be proud of.
Standing ovation. That's standing ovation, right here. Yeah, no, for real. The way you put it is absolutely brilliant. And again, since that's my very last question. So what would you have to say to the aspiring women's health or femtech builders, and scientists and aspiring founders out there? If you
Yeah.
had to send a message, what would that be?
So what I want founders and founders in women's health to know is that you are in the glory years of women's health. You are in the most perfect time to create solutions in this space. Stay focused, make sure that you can be capital efficient, keep your eye keep your eye on the prize here and just build, build, build. And those like me at Portfolia and others will be there, to help you take those next steps. This is the time, friends.
This is the time. I cannot stress that enough. And thank you so much, Trish. It was a beautiful, interview inside and out. I would definitely urge everyone to listen to that. And I would definitely re-listen it myself when it's out. But I thank you for your time and I thank you for, everything that you've shared here today. And we do hope to, stay in touch and we will be following closely with what Portfolio does in the space. So thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you, Elena, and thank you for what you're doing, getting the message out.
Thanks a lot, and tune in to this in our next episodes. Thank you so much.
FemTech Real Money Talks.